welcome back to the Fun Time program. I am your host, John Andrew Fredrickson, here with my beautiful co-host,
Vivica Volt.
And we have a really exciting guest, not in studio today. He's joining us from the Netherlands, far away Europe, where I believe, are you guys under COVID lockdown yet? I'm really curious to know what's going on over there.
I mean, same as the rest of the world, except for, I guess, some of Southeast Asia and Australia are doing well, but...
Well, we're not quite locking down here in New York yet. But anyway, we got Rory from Get Smart with Rory on YouTube, a fellow YouTuber, a fellow science communicator. Not that we can really call ourselves science communicators, but we like to
talk
interview
about it. Yeah.
people in the science world. But Rory, you have an awesome channel where you make videos talking about, you know, things that are going on in the scientific world, things that are interesting to you. And I believe I came across your channel because we did a video on the discovery of phosphine on Venus. I've been obsessed with this discovery. I think that this could potentially be the discovery of the year, if it ends up panning out that you know, maybe there's microbial life or something on Venus, and we won't really know for sure. But the fact that we're able to kind of test our ability to search for life on extrasolar planets and do it right here in our solar system was so exciting to me. So I was, of course, doing a lot of research on YouTube and came across your channel. And I've just been loving watching your videos and seeing you presenting these topics in a way that regular people can understand and get excited about, because that is such an important thing to do today. So I'm so excited to have you here on the show and really appreciate you taking the time. It's 9 a.m. here in New York, in Brooklyn, and we're not the most morning people, but we've got you on Zoom, and you're looking pretty good in the sun over there. So we're happy to do it at this hour. And thanks for joining us. How are you feeling today?
Feeling good. And thanks for having me, John, Vivica. And yeah, bright sunny day over in Netherlands, but
very nice. Very nice. So, I mean, we can't avoid the coronavirus at this point. I'm really curious. Is there any sort of like actual lockdown happening? Because I've been reading in like parts of Italy, parts of France, parts of Germany. I think they're actually like telling people you can't leave your homes except for like really essential things. Is it that bad in the Netherlands right now?
No, I think the Netherlands has been taking I'm actually a little bit upset at how hands-off of an approach they have taken on it. Just in the last month or so, they have re-upped their procedures on it to say, yeah, you need to actually wear a mask in public spaces, and we're going to shut down bars again and some stuff like that.
Wait, that wasn't a requirement? Masks weren't a requirement?
They still really aren't, except for on public transit.
Wow.
What about stores? Are stores enforcing it? Do you see signs when you go in a store, it says you can only come in with a mask?
Stores have never been enforcing it. That's never been a thing. And I mean, that's one reason for a little while. I don't know if it actually went into effect, but I know that Germany was saying that they were going to shut borders down with Netherlands because they're like, yeah, we're trying to get it under control, and you guys are kind of just playing with fire.
We kind of assume that the dumbest people in the world are here in the United States. Not to say that you guys are dumb. I'm curious to get your
from the United States also, I feel comfortable saying that, I mean, we're up in that competition. But
wow, that's so interesting.
You're just like, hold our beer.
There's like 20% of the world cases in the United States right now or something.
Yeah.
We've got like a third of the world.
We like to be first at everything.
Okay, so Netherlands is, I don't know how many million people, but just, you know, itsy bitsy country, not anything huge. But so I don't know exactly how the numbers would compare to a bigger country, but I know I was looking at the data for the spread, whatever. And back in July, there was a time when we had it down to like 3 new cases per day or something.
Right.
Like just almost completely zeroed out.
Under control, yeah.
And it's gotten back now to basically April levels. And
yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly how you hope that. And now, of course, I always worry with, you know, restaurants shutting down, and for a while we could do the outdoor seating for restaurants and try to make that work. But I think Netherlands has a better social safety net for jobs and everything than the United States does. And they did take a lot of affirmative action to make sure that entrepreneurs and everyone could stay whole through this whole crisis.
Okay.
Good.
But even so, I mean, just the world economy has to be dying from...
Well, not the stock market.
No, not the stock market.
The stock market's just been vibing recently. Just
it's been so interesting to
out.
see. This is I've been following the presidential candidacy of Andrew Yang. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was the proponent of a universal basic income and is the first guy to really push a concept like that on the national stage here in the United States. And his book, what is I can't remember the name of his book, but The War on Normal People really opened my eyes to, how technology is kind of separating wealth and capital from the labor class and making the labor class more and more irrelevant. And he was saying that, we're going to have to be dealing with these issues over the next decade. And then all of a sudden this pandemic happens and it's like, whoa, we got to deal with these issues right now. Because when you look at, the stock market and the wealthiest class, they're still doing great. They seem to be making plenty of money because their capital is running along just fine. And the factories or whatever, the ways that they make their money is running along just fine. But the labor is having to stay home and out of work. And here in the United States, we had that first stimulus package passed in April where, they extended unemployment and there were extra benefits for everybody. And that all expired in August and they haven't been able to pass another one. So people are literally just sitting at home with no ability to make any money and no idea when they're going to get another stimulus from the government. So it's nice to hear other countries in Europe are doing a better job with that. But it is really disappointing how much they've dropped the ball here in the United States. And hopefully that changes after this election, but we will see.
I mean, call me a pessimist, but I always think, the one way that you actually get Congress to move on anything is when their seats are being threatened.
Yep.
So I thought the same thing, but it didn't seem to help in this case.
I'm very concerned that now that I don't want to use the word
motivator
stimulus because that's talking about something else in this conversation. But without that push for Congress, I do worry that now I've heard McConnell is saying, we're going to get something passed this year. And it's like, well,
well, you had a whole year,
maybe,
McConnell. What were you doing?
Right. And then if we wait until January when either Trump is reaffirmed or Biden
don't even
sworn
say
in.
Those words.
Don't say those words.
Those words are banned from this channel. Yeah. So, I mean, what has been like watching the election unfold from your perspective in Europe?
I mean, it's a mess. Thankfully, I always think my happiest part of being in Europe is that I don't have to be surrounded by people talking politics all the time, because there is such a divide that's really frustrating. And I find myself becoming increasingly critical of Democrats because I consider myself to be highly liberal and probably more liberal than most Democrats. But beyond that, I feel that there's so much, I'm constantly being like, okay, but guys, we can't use these fallacious arguments and we can't dive off a cliff trying to tell the other side what's wrong, because you'll never, ever get people onto your side if you're straw manning them and doing all these things. And so I often will say that, I'm more critical because I don't just want to feel good. I actually want to win, and we don't.
Right.
And you do that by being more critical of your side and more forgiving of people who disagree.
Amen. Amen. I was really impressed with how Andrew Yang approached that in his presidential campaign. He was really trying to bring people together from across the political spectrum and say that we need to fundamentally rethink our government. And it's not about left versus right. It's about finding new solutions for a new economy and a new world that we have to create because the old one isn't working.
Well, and I think I'm really excited for the idea of UBI. I've actually been looking at a little bit before Andrew Yang, though, as with, I think, so many other people, Yang definitely did bring it to a higher level of consciousness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that who was guest you had on who was talking about
Seth Underwood. He has a show, a channel on YouTube called The Dividend Report, where he got inspired. I think he actually started with UBI much earlier than Yang, but then during the Yang campaign, he started making videos about UBI, and since then he's branched out into more economics talk, but basically trying to continue the conversation about how we can figure out how to get UBI implemented around the world.
Right, because Yang is big on talking about automation taking jobs.
Right.
I remember watching your interview with Seth that he talks more about kind of the far end computers and machines taking over industry further down the road, right?
Yes.
Right.
And I think that that's super interesting, because I always think, I don't know if it's going to be 30 years from now, 40 years from now, maybe earlier because technology is just exploding. But I think that we're going to see a decoupling of any economic forces from people's, merit to like what job you're able to do, because we're going to have these computers that are smarter than people. So what use is there to be even a scientist or whatever? Because and that's going to be fun. And I feel like there's this big, the myth of scarcity that as the economy is getting more and more developed and computers, automation, all of that, UBI doesn't work if you need to motivate people potentially, or it could work better depending on arguments, whatever. But I don't remember who it was to attribute the quote to, but someone was saying that, entertainers like me, yourselves, basketball players, you can't have more than half the population ever be in that industry, because otherwise everyone's just kind of trading money around without actually doing industry. But that, as with all of this other stuff with UBI, is central on the idea that you have to believe that there's a scarcity, that one or two people wouldn't be able to provide all of the product for everyone, which, I mean, obviously we're not there yet, but I think that that is very likely in the future.
100%. And it's important to look at these ideas and say, okay, we can understand where we're going, but then how do we communicate that to the everyday population in a way that they can understand? Because when you start having these conversations with people who haven't really spent the time to think about it or read about it or understand the progression of technology and what that means in 10, 20, 30 years, it's very difficult to get them to agree to this idea that, we need to fundamentally think about how we redistribute the wealth that's being created by technology. And I think that that's something that Yang did so well in his campaign, was how do I figure out how to communicate this to somebody in Iowa who doesn't understand technology, but they can understand that if all the truck driving jobs disappear in the next 10 years, that's going to have a huge impact on our local economy here. And what do we do next? You can't just teach people to code. You know what I mean? No. The transition from being a trucker into some new economy is going to be really hard. And the only way that people can make that transition is if they have an income floor that's not going to enable them to go home and sit home and play video games all day, like some people say, but it's going to enable them to seek out the new economic opportunities in their communities, so they don't have to move to San Francisco or Austin, Texas, or Boston or New York to find a job in the cities. They can create new jobs in their local economies that even the brightest minds in our country might not be able to predict. But if you unleash the power of everybody and give everybody the opportunity to explore new economic potential, that's how we figure out what the new jobs and the new ways of creating value in the local economies are going to be. And that's why I'm so excited about UBI. And I think it's I don't think we're going to be able to get through this decade without doing some form of it in many different countries.
I think that prior to the pandemic, it could have, people are going to drag their feet. We could have gone however long and just, continue hollowing out the middle class and have more and more people just at the poverty line, but never quite getting to the point where there's desperation. But I think with the pandemic, I agree with you that within the next 10 years or so, there needs to be something to, as you say, put the floor for people. And I think that you're so right with UBI that there's, as you say, we can't just make people program and whatever. There's all these industries that are up and coming that, people 10 years ago wouldn't have thought of. And anything that I plan to do, if I say I'm going to put you through a 6-year university or whatever, there's a good chance that I'm going to be training you for a job that isn't in demand 6 years from now.
That's right.
And I think that we're going to see a new need for new things, and that is you get that floor so that you can explore the things that you're passionate about, because that's what would you do. I think Yang actually said it, like, what would you do if you didn't need to worry about where your next meal's coming from?
Exactly. And that's the only way to unleash the incredible human creativity that we're wasting around the globe on people working, miserable jobs for subsistence wages. How many Einsteins, have gone their entire life with never having the opportunity to actually explore the creativity that's inside their brains and completely locked up in there. And we are all missing out as a society as a result of that. So it's not about taking the money and eating the rich and just redistributing it to everybody and socialism and communism that everybody gets afraid of. It's about creating an income floor that grows as the economy grows, as technology creates more wealth. It lifts everybody up with it just enough that we can unleash even more new wealth that we didn't even know existed. Like, it's so simple.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a zero-sum game. When I take money from one sector, it doesn't add equal. Like, when I add money to one sector, rather, it doesn't have to take money from somewhere else. By putting money in, it stimulates everybody to spend more, basically. And as you spend more products are being consumed, which increases. And I mean, we can talk about how much product can the earth sustain. That's a different conversation, but that's not like, if people want to argue that that's the issue, then okay, that's an argument that we can have, but
but that'll be a good problem to have when we get there, but we're not there yet.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, like, we're nowhere near spending all the Earth's resources. The Earth has an abundance of resources, but how we produce them, I mean, we definitely are having an effect on the environment, which is dangerous. And like, but as with a lot of market stuff, we look at, I don't remember the statistic, something like 80% of marketing is aimed at the top 10% of the income earners. Because, I mean, you want to talk about carbon footprint. I don't know all that many families that have speedboats, and it's that kind of thing.
I mean, you know, just your average Joe totally has like 3 mega yachts, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, as they say, you can't think about sustainability and economic and environmental issues until you are able to not have to think about where your next meal is coming from, or how you're going to pay rent. That is the first thing that we have to solve. We simply cannot solve the environmental problem without first solving poverty.
I agree with that completely. It's, you think that Walmart treats its employees terribly and you want to ban Walmart, but the fact is that they have the cheap goods that you need in order to just live day-to-day life. And you're aware that they are a conglomerate, super chain, whatever, that is, screwing people, but they're also, you can choose them or you can choose the other conglomerate super chain. And then there's a couple of slightly less terrible conglomerate super chains that you can do once you have twice the funds or whatever.
But what the big fear with this pandemic really is that it's crushing the smaller businesses, and it's creating more opportunity for the big businesses that have the investment, that have the long-term growth trajectory to be able to just soak up more and more of the economy. And we're seeing a decade's worth of change now happening in less than a year. And, you know, once this pandemic is over, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. In terms of, you know, the bigger change is taking over everything. Amazon is just soaking up everything. Or as Andrew Yang says, they call this the claw. Amazon is soaking up all of the business in our local economies. Yeah.
Well, because Jeff Bezos already owns the Washington Post, correct? And then wasn't there something that he was also looking to buy another major news network, like a cable news network, just recently?
I'm sure he is. Because
that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Media is the way to convince people.
And, you know, Bernie Sanders, I remember when there was some negative Washington Post article about him and how he was looking at capitalism being terrible. And he got on an interview and he said, sorry, what network was it that did this article? Washington Post? Oh, yeah. Okay. Go figure that the paper owned by Jeff Bezos is critical against my things, which are saying that Amazon and whatever need to pay people actual wages.
Weird how, you know, the people, like the person who owns Amazon is going to be really upsetty spaghetti that like someone is calling them out.
And no one's saying that Jeff Bezos is like handing down actual marching orders from the very top. But the thing is that when you're in that circle, you don't need to, because it trickles down that mentality. You don't want to piss off the person who at the end of the day is paying your checks.
I wish I could remember. I watched a video on this where somebody was describing how that actually works, and that the influence isn't overt. It's not direct. You don't have somebody like Rupert Murdoch showing up at Fox News and telling him, this is what I want you to say. But the influence that goes on within that community that is much more subtle as well as who you choose to hire and who you choose to promote through the ranks. You end up with somebody like Tucker Carlson, not because you've trained Tucker Carlson to be this like crazy right-wing pundit, but because he happened to be the person with those views that you could elevate. And so it's much more subtle than, people say, oh, Jeff Bezos is controlling the editorial board at the Washington Post. It's like, no, but at some degree there is influence that's happening that is not as obvious.
A lot of people will credit Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, which was, he wrote basically on that exact thing, that it's a manufactured landscape that people have built up where you say, oh yeah, people can write whatever they want. You have all the choice in the world. But if you do these things, then we're going to blacklist you and you're going to lose out. And several of my favorite news programs online are huge risks that they do this, but by doing the more independent media, they've completely put themselves at risk that they're constantly being bombarded as being false narrative or being supporters of whatever radical agenda
It's a huge issue, yeah.
And it's funny because the corporate media uses it kind of as there are definitely online media sources like Breitbart.
Right.
Or various guys, which are absolutely nefarious actors who are not neutral in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And so you use them as kind of like, oh yeah, all independent media, you can't do independent media. Look at these guys who are really awful, and kind of set that up as the standard that like, oh yeah, this is what independent online media is. Never listen to them. They're not credible. Listen to our established, we've been here for 40 years, therefore there's no way we can be corrupted. And
who are your favorite independent thinkers? Who do you like to follow for a different perspective?
For political stuff, which, I mean, since 2019 has been a big thing of when I'm wanting to watch news about America, political is going to be the stuff. And I really like The Hill Rising with Cigar and Eddie and Crystal Ball.
They're fantastic.
I think that I really like that they go out of their way to get a range of issues and actually like listen to the people that they interview rather than kind of get somebody who they just want to use as a punching bag.
Right.
Which, I mean, yeah, sometimes, of course, part of them being actual good newscasters, in my opinion, is the fact that they bring on people that listening to them makes me want to drive nails through my head because they're bringing on someone who actually is psychophantic and just a frustrating person to listen to.
Right.
But I think that it's important that you hear those sides because then you know what the spin is in other areas that aren't just your personal echo chamber, which, I mean, that's the big issue with trying to follow anything political or even slightly controversial on Facebook is that you're only friends and you only like the pages that say the exact things that you like. And so you then just talk super negatively about everyone who isn't in your little circle, and everyone's congratulates each other on having the exact right viewpoint, which, let's face it, for the most part, I think one of the big issues with really any political party system, not just the two-party American system, is that you're raised, a lot of people are raised with parents who strongly believe one side or another, or you certainly, if you turn on the news, you basically only hear set political lines. But I don't know anybody who, if they actually had thought up their political ideas on their own without being influenced by this being Democrat and this being Republican, would have formed the Democratic Party platforms on their own just based on their own understanding of how the world works.
Yeah.
But because there are these dominant parties, it's everything Republicans say is bad and everything Democrats say is good, or vice versa. And it's just a mess. I don't know.
It becomes an identity, and you quickly pick up on what are the beliefs that I need to hold in order to be a good part of this identity, so that I don't have conflict with my identity. I don't have conflict with the people that I care about, that I can fit into the social structure in a way that makes me feel good about myself and my life. And that's, these are old ways of surviving in a social structure that we're so ingrained with. You know, it's how we survived on the savannas. It's how we survived as hunter-gatherers. It's how we survived in early agricultural societies. And our modern world just, it doesn't lend itself to that uninformed, uninquisitive type of thinking. And it's so challenging to get people to rise above and beyond that. And education is so important for it. But not everybody's going to go and get the same, really rigorous education that teaches them to really explore outside of their comfort zone. And that's honestly, it's something we can't expect the majority of people to do. So how do we deal with that without getting people to go into a much more in-depth, rigorous way of thinking about the world? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and you get into the weird thing with like voting that like, do you want only people who are politically educated to be able to cast votes? But that kind of, it's like, American system originally had the electors because the idea was that there was no way that you could know enough about the presidency to do an informed vote. So you would elect people to vote on your behalf. But then we get into the same thing that we were kind of talking about that, do you really want only like the political elites, the people who really have a specific reason to want politics to be a certain way? Do you want them to be the only ones to have a voice?
Exactly.
And I'm really, as someone who historically has voted with the Democratic Party, I'm pretty concerned that I feel that the Democratic Party is increasingly becoming the very urban, very highly educated, affluent party, which is kind of fine because I think education's great. And I think, being urban is fine. I like a lot of the, the ideals, but that also kind of fits being District 1 of the Hunger Games.
Right. And it also becomes isolating to people who are in like the middle of the country and people who are in more rural areas because they feel like, oh, those big city folks don't really understand us. They don't understand what life is like.
And
they're
in many
just
ways
trying to dictate.
Don't.
Right. And it's like, oh, they're just trying to dictate their stupid beliefs on us, but that's not what we want to do out here.
Well, the beautiful thing about the way our government is set up is that ideally different people in different parts of the country should have different representation in Congress. The problem is they go and they draw these congressional districts in ways where you end up stacking all these Democrats over here together with all this like wide swath of rural Republican area, and then they compete for votes in these swing districts. And for a couple of years, one of them gets represented in Congress, and for a couple of years, the other one doesn't. I was just spending some time driving through upstate New York. District 19, for example, is just like this. And if you go into like the more populated area, it's so hyper liberal. Right. There's Biden signs everywhere. It would have been Bernie signs when the primary was running. But as soon as you go over the hill out into the biggest area and the less populous area, it's Trump signs everywhere. And they don't get the same they don't each get their own representation. They have to fight for representation. And then the other side feels like they're not represented. So it's almost like we need to figure out how to divide the congressional representation better so that people actually get better representation in Congress. And I don't know, I think that there's so much that can be done to improve that system. But at the end of the day, it's like changing these kinds of things is so difficult as well.
It's incredibly difficult. So long as the United States remains the United States, which I don't see any reason that that's going to change. You can't change the system without changing the system.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work. I really like that Pete Buttigieg, for example, was talking about changing the Supreme Court and actually doing like real reforms in Congress, not just having a president come in and like writing an executive order and saying, this is how we're going to do it now. And then the next election, somebody just switches it, but actually like going into Congress, convincing Congress that these are changes that are better for the country, but it becomes partisan, well, everybody's going to evaluate it on the perspective of, is this going to help my party or is this going to help the other party? And it's the same thing for like statehood for Puerto Rico or any of these other issues, which is like, no, this would enfranchise more people. It would help the country. But as long as it's any individual party thinks it could affect their results in the voting booth, they're not going to vote for it.
If I could change one thing with United States governance, I would absolutely push to make Congress do more because the presidential powers have just been expanding, continuously for quite a while.
Yeah.
And they only expand, they never contract. So it's
power only takes, never gives.
Yeah, exactly.
But so we get a thing, but Congress at any time could be the one. They could say, like, put a firm line, like, no, if we don't declare war, then we're not giving funding for war. And just like they could actually block. And the same thing, the Supreme Court has more and more become a making law group that they rule on something and that becomes law of the land. But any Supreme Court decision, they have to be ruling on some kind of law about whether it's constitutional, unconstitutional, how the law is, what the meaning of certain laws is. But at the end of the day, it's become a court that Congress should really be making the laws and not handing it over to the Supreme Court to deal with, but they don't want to do that because since the Supreme Court doesn't need to be elected every year, they can just let the Supreme Court. I don't think that this current 6-3 Republican majority on the court is actually that big of a threat to like gay marriage, for instance, because I think that the Republican justices understand that gay marriage is a terrible issue for their constituents in swing districts in Congress to have to argue on. And they don't want to, like, if they open that back up, every swing district Republican is going to have to defend that again. And because of the Republican Party officially having the stance of no, gay marriage is bad, whatever. Right now, the Republican Congress can say, oh, well, if it was me, I wouldn't allow that. But I'm so sorry, my hands are tied. I can't do anything about it. Vote for me. Right. Because politically, it's got enough broad support, even in conservative areas that people aren't willing to overturn that. Yeah. Well, and it's pathetic that either side in current presidential election didn't have a sweeping victory. Because honestly, if either side had just been like, yeah, we're absolutely, if Biden had taken up, I feel, a lot more of the progressive things and said, yeah, COVID proves that we need more healthcare in the country. That's a like 70-30 position currently across the nation. It's crazy that, like, of all things for Biden to not take up, especially considering how many other primary candidates were in favor of Medicare for all. The fact that is one of the few things where he's like, no, I'm not gonna run on that. I feel like people kind of distance themselves from it because that became in the Democratic primary. It's, are you Bernie Sanders or are you against what he says? Right. And Trump kept trying to pin, you are just going to do whatever the progressives tell you to do. You don't actually have a platform. But you don't stand on your own platforms. Well, Biden actually adopted them. But then on the other hand, if Donald Trump had done the same thing and Pelosi was doing a $2 trillion stimulus package coming up to the election, if he'd called the bluff and actually ran as a populist, kind of as he did in 2016, and said, no, you're right, we need money and we're not going to do a $2 billion, we'll do a $3 billion and just put the money in. What sitting president rejects having more money given to the people in an election right year? Before an election? It's the most bizarre thing. It literally would have won him the election. And I almost wouldn't have been mad had he just been like, money for everyone. We're going to get through this coronavirus situation. We're going to make sure everybody has money in the bank. It's going to keep the economy running. He could have totally just run on that. And absolutely, he would have been able to get Republicans in the Senate to come on board. Easy election for either side to win. And the fact that it's a nail biter right now. Yeah. One makes me think that a lot of pollsters need to just figure their shit out because... Right. I mean, God, yeah. Because that was a mess. But beyond that, both sides are basically running on the other side as the devil rather than actually running on positive policy change. And maybe if we actually had policy in our politics, we would get stuff done. Yeah. I mean, that's why I was so in love with Andrew Yang as a candidate, and continuously through this whole debacle with the stimulus and both sides not being able to reach an agreement, he has been the only one going on CNN as a Democratic representative and calling out Nancy Pelosi and basically saying, make the deal. I don't care what you're trying to fight for behind closed doors that the American people don't understand. Make the deal. If it's $400 a week, if it's, $1.2 billion, whatever it is, make the deal, pass the deal, get money into people's hands, stop playing politics. But the problem is we have an election. So impressed with Andrew Yang throughout the thing. Like he was not my number one candidate, but he was always a candidate that I respected listening to because he actually always backed up whatever he was saying with actual substantive policies rather than just trying to knock down everybody else. He said,
exactly,
here's what I think. Here's why I think it. Here's what I would do.
Right.
And unfortunately, he kind of got shoehorned as being the UBI candidate early on because he is a businessman. He had no political career before this. And Bernie and Biden definitely sucked up a ton of oxygen within the primary. So to me, it's amazing that of everybody on stage during the primaries, I think that we're going to see in 2024, 2028, whenever there's the next major Democratic primary, we're going to continue seeing some of the progressive ideology Bernie Sanders pushed being rehashed. Like, okay, is now the time when we want to do Medicare for all? Is now the time when? And I do think that if the Democratic Party doesn't learn all the exact wrong lessons from this campaign, that will be a thing that is where the Democratic Party will continue to be more progressive. But also beyond the back to normal Joe Biden campaign, get rid of Trump, and Bernie Sanders, Medicare for all, minimum wage, etc., I can't hardly name any policy positions of anyone else that was on the stage that are going to matter in any way 10 years from now, except for Andrew Yang. And I think that the fact that he has, whether or not he runs for president again, the fact that he brought so much attention to issues and continues to do so is just phenomenal. And I have a lot of respect for him in that.
I have high hopes that he's going to have a good position within the Biden administration if Biden does win. He did a really good job of building inroads with Biden and his team. And he's, one of the things he did during the primary was he kept reminding the other candidates, hey, I actually know this stuff. He had a great back and forth with Elizabeth Warren about, Elizabeth Warren was saying that, automation is not really going to take the jobs. And she's like, I don't have the data in front of me. And Yang's like, hey, I got the data. Here's my book. And she actually read his book and started talking positively about him. And he did that with every candidate, and Joe especially. So, I have high hopes that he's going to be working within the administration and finding ways to implement some of these ideas, from a little bit more behind the scenes. And then in hopes that down the road we have more candidates running with these ideas, because that's the long game, really. It's never going to be any individual election. It's about changing the minds of enough people and inspiring more people to push these ideas forwards.
Yeah, I think short of somehow getting rid of the American first past the post voting system, which
ranked choice voting is passing in several different states now. Maine is using it.
I have noticed that. And I mean, I think that ranked choice voting still obviously has its problems. We see the Australian government has ranked choice. And to be fair, they've implemented it in not the best ways. But despite that, their current government is not super awesome, I wouldn't say. But I think that the winner take all state elections is ridiculous. And first past the post means that there can only ever be two political parties that matter, which means basically to actually change policy in a significant way, the primary becomes in many ways more important than the actual election. And that's ugly because the primary is also first past the post. So
Yeah, I saw an interesting graphic posted today about people have been talking about, when we look at the political spectrum in the United States, we tend to depict it by state or by like larger localities like that. But when you actually break it down to like the very local districts of how people are voting, you start to see this really nice mixture of red and blue throughout the entire country. Whereas if you just look at like which state did Trump win, which state did Biden win, it's this weird swath of red with like a couple random blue states, right? On the coasts and maybe like Nevada or maybe like New Mexico and states like that. But if you actually look at the individual districts, there are people voting all over the place, blue and red, and they're kind of interspersed with each other. And somebody posted a graphic of where all the donors came from in the primaries for each candidate and which districts donated to which candidate. And the country was almost entirely Bernie Sanders donors, with little pockets of like Buttigieg donors in Indiana. You had Beto O'Rourke donors in Texas. You had, I can't think of anywhere else that a candidate was beating Bernie in terms of individual donors, not total dollar amount donors, but total number of people in that area donating to Bernie Sanders. And it's amazing to realize that a system like the first past the post voting, I think makes it more difficult for a candidate like that who is getting a broad array of support, but isn't able to beat out the party machine in any specific area in order to walk away with it. So yeah, I mean, thinking about how we do our voting and how we elect candidates, I think is so important for this. But you're starting to hear those conversations happening. And the nice thing about the primaries, though, is that the parties kind of can do it however they want. It doesn't take a constitutional amendment to be able to change how you're going to do your voting in different states during the primary. And so I think we're going to start to see more experimentation with that.
And that's, I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier. The other great thing is that to change how electors are chosen doesn't require constitutional amendment either, because that's been left to the states on how they do things. Have you heard it's like, I don't remember how many votes away, but the state initiative to make the electoral college be just straight popular vote?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it takes something like half of the states agreeing to it. Once you get to a certain number.
It takes enough that there are basically 270 electorals within the states that have agreed.
Exactly.
Right. Which if it's, New York, California, and Texas, then you're pretty close to there already. But
right. Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting initiative. I mean, here's the thing, though. Getting rid of the Electoral College brings with it a whole host of other problems. And in either system, there are problems that we need to deal with certain people being underrepresented. And that's just inherent in any political system. And these are things we're going to have to be struggling with. But the fact that we've had such a huge divide between the person winning the popular vote over the past 20 years and the person winning the Electoral College, as well as the Senate just almost being completely in Republican hands because of the way that the senators are allocated across the country. These are big problems that we need to wrestle with. And yeah, I don't know.
There's not easy solutions.
No.
Right.
It's, I think, Winston Churchill has the famous quote about democracy is the single worst system of government out there, except for every other one that's been tried from time to time.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, at least it has built in within the system the ability to change and the ability to update with the times as better ideas come out. That's the hope. Because when you disenfranchise the people and make them feel like they don't have a voice in the system, that's when you end up with revolt and revolution in ways that I don't think actually helps anyone. But are we in a system where people feel like they have just enough of a voice, but they don't actually? That's the real question. I think technology contributes to that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how like social media and the big media, mainstream media networks are kind of contributing to this feeling of like, hey, we're getting our voice heard, but maybe we're not actually doing anything.
I mean, I think that you have that basically what you just said is kind of covered, that whichever way the media says is what is correct. Like I don't even want to hardly talk about it because I feel like this is getting into the political area where I'm going to say dangerous things. But if we go back to 2016 in the Democratic primary, I was always really highly critical of the media coverage that, all of the superdelegates for the Democratic Party were reported as being counted from the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would have things in the early states where Sanders would win a state versus Clinton, and then the media would go and say, okay, and so now we're back to the primary and it's 293 for Clinton versus 18 for Sanders. Good job with that victory. And people feel defeated from the very beginning because it seems like it matters, but it's not counted. But the media can control the narrative. And if you control it well, which I think the media kind of tries to do to a certain degree, then you have people believing that it's their choice to do whatever the media wants them to do.
Well, ironically, I think that's one of the big reasons that Hillary ended up losing was that the Democratic Party disenfranchised so many voters who felt like their voice just simply didn't matter in the primary and that Bernie never had a chance anyway. And how many Bernie voters either didn't vote or ended up voting for Trump, which is just like mind blowing to me. But you understand when people feel that they're disenfranchised by their party, they're not going to turn out for the candidate who ends up felt like they were just picked by the party elite because they feel like that's not their candidate.
Well, and you mentioned, as technology, like the technology involvement in it, and you mentioned Facebook or media stuff. And I have to say, we're talking about, democracy being the ability to change things and has whatever. And there is an interesting argument to be said that, if you have a dictatorship and it's actually a benevolent one, then that can see the best growth for the country, so long as their interests align with the interests of their people. The issue, of course, is that any kind of dictatorship is not sustainable, because as soon as whoever is the leader that happens to be really helpful for the country passes away, often violently, based on the history of dictatorships, they leave a power vacuum. And even people with best interests at heart, I do think there is a certain degree of being self-serving, even if you are a generally good person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially going into a dictatorship role in that capacity, because the type of people who are trying to seek that much power are very rarely benevolent enough.
Yeah. Well, and that was where I get into the technology. I think that it would be very interesting. I know, John, that you talked a little bit, or I've heard you mention the singularity.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that we get into an interesting thing where, if we get to, call it 40 years from now, a hyper intelligent computer force that is just worlds beyond as much smarter compared to us as we are to hamsters or something. People like to say monkeys, but let's face it, we're not. I think that it is the ultimate human ego to believe that we are anywhere near the top of the potential intelligence scale.
Right. Because I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. Octopuses and cuttlefish are pretty motherfucking smart.
Yeah.
And orcas are hilariously fucking smart. But they just happen to not be on land.
But that's just the beginning, like how far can this intelligence thing go?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Crows are
it's
pretty
also how much
smart too.
energy can an intelligence harness to improve itself, basically.
Right.
And at a certain point, I have a couple of videos which they're old and I hate them just because of the quality being terrible from starting out. But talking about, the end of the world with artificial intelligence, that we set up a million different scenarios that I tell, my new hyper intelligent computer, hey, could you make me rubber bands? Right. And I don't tell it, I don't put a stop condition on it. I don't tell it to do it only so well as it's beneficial to humanity, and it turns the entire world into a rubber band factory, because that's what I told it to do. And it's smart, but it's not smart in the ways that we're
need it
like.
To be.
It has a different, at the end of the day, humans are driven by survival of humans.
Right.
And with technology increasing so rapidly in the last couple of 100 years, we're still pretty much keyed to passing on our genes to the single next generation and not thinking beyond that. But we are, of course, getting into a scenario where, we might make the planet not so habitable for people, 100 years from now.
Right.
Do you think that that's going to happen in our lifetime, the singularity? And maybe that's not a good word because it brings up, so many other connotations and ideas that people have attached to it. But just the simple concept of computers getting to the point where they are able to rival human intelligence and that they're able to continue improving of their own accord. Do you think that's going to happen in our lifetime?
Well, okay. So I think that there is one system by which we're almost guaranteed to have it kind of happen within our lifetime. I think that trying to intentionally make something which is smarter than yourself, I think that there's a good argument that is on the line of possibility. Like, it might be short of just, bashing keys together and hoping that we randomly find something smarter than us. It might be impossible to intentionally make something smarter than us. I'm willing to credence that possibility, that theory. But have you heard of whole brain emulation?
Whole brain emulation?
Yeah.
No.
So some years ago, scientists have done this with flatworms. And flatworms, of course, have I think 30 or something brain cells.
Right.
So just
I've seen this, and they mapped it out completely.
Basic of animals.
Yes.
But the concept behind whole brain emulation is that you take a computer and you have the computer simulate every neuron in the brain. and how they connect together, and then basically just take that entire brain simulation and run it
on a computer.
Yeah. Right. And so the idea being that I don't know that we can get something that is strictly smarter than humans, but what we could do and are very likely to do, just because it's only based on processing power, basically, is simulate a human brain and remove things like the need of sleep, hunger, set it onto problems, and just let it go nuts more efficiently than people, but still technically at the human level.
Right.
That's really interesting.
And we did this with, I love this with the flatworms, because they did it with the flatworm and they actually put it into a robot.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. No, it's so crazy. You should look into it. They made a little robot. They gave it sensors basically for proximity things, that it could bump things, and they could fake that it would smell things by just basically putting an input into the computer program to say, yeah, you smell things over here. And this little robot flatworm will move around. It'll go seeking for the things that it smells, and it bumps into objects, course corrects, moves around them. And
they wired it based on the way a flatworm's brain is wired.
Yeah, they wired it, they just simulated the flatworm brain and basically didn't give it any instruction. They just said, okay, here's a flatworm brain. Let's see what happens if we just start the program and put it into the computer and let it do its thing.
Wow. But that's simulating the structure of the brain, because our brains change as we learn things, right? You know, and like two different flatworms might have different life experience. Are they able to adapt their neural structure as a result of their life experience that they're learning, essentially? And like, would a flatworm that has different life experience have a slightly different brain structure as a result?
I mean, that's getting into basically synaptic connections in the brain.
Right.
And the difficulty as we get into the human brain is, it's been a while since I did the video. I used to have the numbers, but I think human brain has something like 60 million neurons or something in it. And each neuron is able to make, I believe, 3 connections, and they change and various things. And so it scales exponentially how much processing power you need for each neuron, which is why going from 30 to 30 million is a Herculean task. Like, it doesn't take just a little bit more processing power.
Right.
It doesn't even take 1 million times the processing power it takes.
Right.
Exponentially more, yeah.
Ridiculous amounts. But at some point, the limiting factor isn't so much the ability to build the brain. It's, if I want a specific learned experience, human brain, whatever, I need to be able to, either we know the human brain so well, and maybe by trying to make the simulated brain, we've learned more about the human brain, because you start building it up from scratch, kind of.
Right.
So either we know it well enough that we're able to just program in all of the knowledge and whatever, which would be really interesting, because then you could have this brain, like if you scan my brain, I have a topical understanding of all of these subjects. But if you tell me to do even advanced mathematics that I learned at one point, I'm going to hit stumbling blocks, because my brain just isn't set up for it.
Right.
But if you can program it in that it just knows it, then you can be like, oh yeah, and let's give this person who is only Einstein level intellect, but give him the entire Encyclopedia Britannica as a just information source to the side.
Right.
But at some point, if we're just trying to, if we don't learn it from building it up, then we need to have scanned in an individual person's brain. And once again, I can scan in 30 neurons from a flatworm fairly easily, just basically dissect them, look at the connections. But to accurately scan all of the synaptic connections in a human brain, you would need really nuanced scanning technology of some sort.
Do you think Neuralink is the path to that? Are you familiar with Musk's company?
I love Neuralink. I think that Elon Musk, as I learn more about him, is a little bit crazy in his way.
A little bit. He's a lot crazy. He's way off the fucking deep end, man, but he gets shit done.
And so I always, whenever I hear like a TED talk with him or anything, I give it a grain of salt, because he has weird ways of looking at problems, and he kind of oscillates rapidly between rampant optimism and pessimism.
Sure. But do you think that type of invasive scanning, so to speak, I mean, Neuralink, to give our audience a quick rundown of exactly what he's trying to do with Neuralink, he's trying to take individual threads and insert them into the brain at the neuronal level so that you can read and write to individual neurons in the brain, which should enable you to, as you're thinking, communicate with external devices, let's say your phone, or just directly to the internet, so that as you're thinking and you want to know, what is something, what's the structure of the flat worm brain, you'd immediately have that knowledge because you'd be accessing it from the internet just directly through your brain.
Sure.
But you're talking about these brain scans. Do you think that in order to do this kind of brain scanning, it's going to require that reading of individual neurons and synapses by inserting electrodes directly into the brain? Or are we going to have other technology that enables us to do it non-invasively?
So I would say with Neuralink, we're looking, you mentioned the threads. I'm sure that there is an official term for that, whatever, but less invasive, also less accurate is like, beta wave scans that we can do with just electrodes on the surface of thing. And so there is weird things on how we could develop that ability to do a read from the brain to the computer.
Right. I remember reading.
I think that for the trying to get the synaptic pattern for emulation, I don't think that the Neuralink idea actually helps. I think that Neuralink is a fantastic means that we're going to potentially see augmented human intelligence, because like I already have, my cell phone somewhere, which I'm able to use to access data and be a calculator for me and whatever. And that's at my fingertips. I would love to have a direct access to that I just think, what's 172 times 86? Oh, of course it's
instant and in high bandwidth, and it's just that information is there.
I think Alzheimer's, of course, is a big problem as we get an increasingly aging population.
Yeah,
and I think that one of the things that we're going to see with something like Neuralink is that people start offloading their memories to an external database. That my memories are faulty. Let's put it to this advanced computer that I carry around in my pocket.
But what's crazy? We already do that. Like I take notes in Evernote every day because I don't remember things perfectly. And we've already learned as a species how to use technology to augment our brains and to enable us to remember things that we couldn't otherwise remember. So as technology increases, that ability to interface with the technology gets more and more complex. So you're talking about like actually offloading a memory in the sense that like you're literally reading the memory out of your brain. It's not like you writing it in a notes app. It's you literally like taking it and transcribing that brain structure.
It's like doing a video recording, except with all of it. It's even better than a video recording because if we do it right, it's also going to pick up all of the context of, all the feelings and connections to all of the other pathways of knowledge that I know are all going to be, I said little pathways, not the entire path, but just, link this piece of knowledge to these other pieces of knowledge, which are also stored. And those are able to be found through some file system. And
exactly. And the way that's encoded.
Eventuality, hopefully, it gives everybody, perfect recall, and it doesn't feel like it's an external source. It just feels like it's a part of your being that you just happen to be able to do calculations on the fly and have perfect memory. And
right. So Elon's reason for starting Neuralink is he's afraid of the singularity. He's afraid of the potential for technology as it reaches this level of intelligence to through no intentional reason, be no longer beneficial or benevolent to humanity, and could potentially leave humanity in the dust in the same way that we've left the rest of the animal kingdom in the dust.
We either achieve utopia or extinction, basically.
Right. So his reason for creating Neuralink is that he thinks the only way for humanity to compete in that future world is for us to become part of the technological sphere and to grow with the technology and expand our abilities with the technology. And so that's why he thinks we need to merge with the technology like that. Do you think that that's the right approach?
I think that augmenting human intellect may or may not actually be able to compete with full-on artificial intelligences. I think that there's a chance of it. I think that it's one of the more likely ways that we reach higher intelligence, whatever, because, some programmer somewhere who has this integrated computer or whatever figures out a line of code that they say, hey, if I implement this one little line of code into my integrated computer, not only will I have perfect recall like everybody else, I'll actually be 0.5% smarter, whatever. But then once you have that one time, he implements it to his, he shares it around, and it's just going to increase like that. And so that is, but unless we fully commit to basically being computers ourselves, we're still limited by our humanity.
Right.
And I don't mean that in the way of like morals or ethics. I just mean like we have certain artifacts already within our ways of thinking, which are from when we were hunter-gatherer, whatever species, that, fight or flight reflex is still valuable to us in modern living, but it's definitely not as critical to our life as it was several millennia ago.
Right.
And I think that we're going to be limited by these artifacts that, like the idea that I'm in the camp that says that so long as life remains interesting, I would like to live forever, so long as I'm healthy and life is interesting.
Amen.
And I know a lot of people, some of my best friends who I otherwise consider very logical people, say, oh my God, no, living forever is a curse.
Right.
And you say, well,
I struggle, just to pause you there, I struggle to not see that as just purely short-sighted and not having fully thought it through.
Yeah. And I also have a thing. Yeah, it's
meaning the people who don't see that perspective, who
no,
don't
I
understand that life could be incredible living for thousands of years under the right conditions, because they always think that, well, here are the reasons why it would suck. And it's like, well, no, we'd only do it if we could fix those problems.
Yeah, you make up reasons kind of after the fact for why you think it, but if you didn't already have your answer, you wouldn't make up the reasons for what your answer is. Like I've heard, if you're anti-death, you must be anti-birth because we're going to have a completely runaway population.
Right. Population problem, yeah.
And that's kind of true. But on the other hand, I think that by the time we have to worry about that kind of thing, the universe is a very big place, and I'm not too worried about filling it up.
Agreed.
Right. I mean, if we can live for thousands of years, it would make space travel a lot more...
Yep. Interesting.
Something that would actually matter, because right now, any space travel...
We're limited to just like within our galaxy
to ever reach whatever planet that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas like we could actually travel to different star systems and explore different planets and the exoplanets that could potentially harbor life and colonize life elsewhere.
Seen a big joke occasionally popping up that the day that immortality is discovered, however we get to it, suddenly all of the ultra rich and big corporations are going to care much more about sustaining the planet and keeping things
here. Yeah.
Nice.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think that there's so many benefits from having people live longer and have a longer kind of trajectory in their thinking as a result of that, because so many of the problems we face in the world today come from very short-sighted thinking, where it's like, I'm not going to be around, Yeah. It's not a problem I need to face.
I on to your question about if I think that things like Neuralink actually will prevent robot apocalypse, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at least human augmentation will buy us some time. It's something that if we're able to think faster, better, whatever, share thoughts across Neuralink, that's one of the things that I am actually very much looking forward to on something like that, I don't need to be limited by how eloquent I am in speech, that I can basically just share my entire thought with the emotional context and everything directly.
Yes. Elon is so amazing because he talks about that. He talks about how language is compression, transmission, and re-expansion in a way where so much information is lost. And it's like, if we could actually be communicating with what we're thinking,
so
totally changes the game.
Ready to have mind blown? Maybe you've already thought of this. Maybe you're going to be like, well, yeah, everyone knows that. That's basic philosophy of computers.
Hit us.
But okay, so have you heard the thing that language actually changes how you think of the world? That if you have more words for the color green based on different shades, as we've seen with like tribes in the Amazon, it actually, if you show me 2 shades of green, I literally might not be able to even see there's a difference between them. But if I know that one green has this name and one green has the other name, it gives me the ability to actually see them.
Yeah.
Right.
And
they found this in Russian because Russians have more words for the color blue. So they can actually see more nuance in the shades of blue because they have more words for it.
When I'm trying to describe it to you, that I know cyan versus green versus whatever. And
you already lost me.
What?
Said you already lost me. I don't do colors so well. Cyan, I've heard of that one.
But it's not just that I'm able to describe it better. It actually is a thing that I fundamentally can't tell that there's a difference between them without the words, apparently.
Yes.
Right.
And so I think that if we get a thing with language and a telepathy sort of thing using Neuralink or whatever, we're going to see, and it's going to take years basically until through generations. But at a certain point, if I want to describe a color to you, I don't need to know maroon versus scarlet versus burgundy. I say red and I send all of the contextual information to you so that you know exactly what shade I mean.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so by doing that, I overcome language because I'm able to express much more complicated, nuanced thoughts with simple language or potentially no language. But as I do that, and over generations, as we start to do simpler and simpler speech because the context is implied through mental stuff, we lose the words for scarlet and burgundy and crimson and stop being able to recognize those colors from a single shade of red.
Wouldn't you still maintain the concepts? Wouldn't you still maintain the concepts even if you didn't maintain the words for them?
I mean, that's the big question.
Right. Interesting.
I feel like that nuance would be lost through generations, the same way that it has been gained through generations by developing the language around it.
Yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
I mean, like there's a tribe in the Amazon, I believe it's in the Amazon, that they only tell direction by like north, south, east, west.
I've heard that.
So they actually don't know what left and right is. And if you try to explain something and give them directions by saying only turn left here, turn right there, they will get completely lost. Whereas
I
if
heard
you
that they
explain
did a wonderful experiment that they basically, that tribe I've heard about, I don't know where they're from. I couldn't say what peoples that was, but this group maintained their ability to know true north. So long as they're conscious, you can put them underground, whatever. And they always, because they just, as they turn, they keep kind of in their subconscious, like they keep that orientation of that's still north for every turn they make. But if you then, while they're unconscious, if you have them while they're asleep, move them underground where they're not able to, into a place they've never been and don't allow them to orient themselves, then they become just completely like the most directionally challenged ever because they have, if they don't have context, if they were moved while they sleep and they're in an area they've never been before, they have no way at all to express where they are. There's any direction could be north.
We rely on so many visual cues to remind us and keep us oriented. And if you're able to really develop your ability to constantly recognize those cues and to maintain a bird's eye view in your head as you're, picking up on new cues, that's totally doable. But you're absolutely right. If you remove all of those cues and you go into a dark room and, you fall asleep or whatever, and you wake up again, you've been turned around, there's no way for you to reestablish that without getting some external cue, whether it's from the sun or from the stars or whatever it is.
And I mean, on the note of visual cues, like this is just one of those weird things that I don't know that it's not relevant to the bigger conversation, whatever. But you're aware of sounds a little bit while you're asleep. And if someone calls your name, it's going to wake you up to a greater degree than other things. And some of this is, once again, the primordial danger sense that if you hear something loud, you got to get up and go.
Yeah.
But also a weird one, because you mentioned vision. I was reading a article a couple of weeks ago that apparently exposure to light, specifically red light in kids, helps prevent nearsightedness as they develop.
Interesting.
And they did things based on this and whatever. And in it, they mentioned that so you can spend a little bit of time just with a bright red light on near infrared to help vision potentially, particularly with, once again, kids. But you don't need to have your eyes open during it, because when you shut your eyes, you don't filter red. Red passes through your eyes completely, whatever.
Okay.
And you don't think about it. But then when you close your eyes, it's like, yeah, of course you see red when your eyes are closed, but it's not. It just bypasses your thinking about it.
That's so interesting. Wow.
That's crazy.
And it's the same thing, that if you go into a room, you very quickly stop hearing any static noises.
Right.
Smells.
Your brain filters.
Yeah, you filter out so much automatically. And it's just weird thinking about like all of the information that you are passively receiving at every moment, temperature, touch, hearing, whatever. And you learn to ignore 90% of it.
This is what's so interesting about the concept of like uploading memories and things like that, because, and this is something I've really learned being a photographer and a filmmaker, is that when you're trying to recreate something visually, or in the sense of film, you're including sound as well, you have to choose as a creator how you portray it. If you just take a picture of a landscape, right, it doesn't capture the feeling that you experience there. But then if you edit the shit out of that picture in a way that's not really like true, it's not an accurate representation, it can convey the feeling that you experienced being there in a way that is not quite possible without adding your interpretation on top. And that's what the brain is constantly doing. It's interpreting the world. It's compressing that information in a way that's useful and creating a memory that isn't a perfect carbon copy of that experience.
Is
because so much of the information that's coming into your brain at any given point is irrelevant to how we want to remember that, right? And so when we're talking about storing memories, we're talking about storing that brain's compressed version and interpretation of the world and the scene. So it's not a perfect like video, where all the information is stored. It's storing, the brain's interpretation of that. And I think that that's so interesting. It would be so amazing to be able to like recall those memories and those interpretations accurately.
Well, I seem to remember when you talk about people with perfect recall, they say that anything above like 80% actual recall of information that you actively are trying to remember, anything above that is phenomenal. The average person is somewhere in the 60s to 70s.
Interesting.
And that's information that you are trying to remember.
Right.
People with so-called perfect recall even usually don't break more than about 90% recall of the important things. As you say, you still don't remember the exact temperature and whatever.
The passive thing.
And so that gets into weird things also with false memory.
Right.
That, of course, everyone believes that any memory that they have, it has all the information in it.
Right.
Because you feel like it's all
you
things
experienced
that
it.
Whatever. But your brain does a lot of, in the same way that it ignores stuff, it also gap fills. It's the same way when I compress video to send it through whatever, it compresses the video using certain things. And when it decompresses it, it looks all fine, and it sounds fine. And we think, it's all there, but it's actually lost a whole bunch of information that it just wasn't.
It's like the invisible gorilla theory or the invisible gorilla experiment. Where,
I love that one.
If your brain is being told that you need to focus on like how many times you're seeing a ball being passed between a group of people, you might miss the fact that someone dressed in a gorilla suit is walking directly through all of these people, because your brain is so focused on watching the ball that it's ignoring all the information around it.
It's the most bizarre experience to watch this, not knowing what you're looking for, and then to be told, wait, there was a guy in a gorilla suit in that scene and you just didn't see it.
Did you see the gorilla?
I've seen, I think that, videos of that. A little simpler experiment that I've actually wanted to try myself, because it only takes one co-conspirator to help you with it. I've seen ones very similar that you go to a college campus or something and you have a map and you ask for directions to the student center or something. Mm-hmm. And then as the person is starting to give directions, you take someone with a big old whiteboard or something that they're carrying, pass in between you. And during the pass, you trade positions that you grab the whiteboard from them and continue on, and then have them stand with the map.
I've seen this done in YouTube videos. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it's something that I want to try because it's so simple to just get a friend and see like how often people are going to double take or even to the slightest degree notice that.
It's a different person. Yeah, it's also strange because like even when you're looking out for things and you're trying to find the invisible gorilla in the room, there's still other things that you might miss. Like you might miss that the curtains changed color, or that someone changed their shirt, or that like two people dressed very similar actually switch places, or something along those lines, or that someone had a hat on and took a hat off, kind of a thing.
But it feels like a full memory to you.
Right.
Exactly. And that's the weird one. And that's why also when we start to get to people who have, photographic memory, perfect recall, that it gets extra weird because once again, we know that it's never actual video camera perfect. There's always detail missed. But the closer you get to perfect, the more reason you have to believe that your memories are 100% perfect. And so we see actually kind of more false memories pop up with people that have perfect memory. Because,
that's so interesting. Their confidence is too high.
I'm willing to say like, oh, I'm not sure that I remember this because my recall is not very good. And I'm willing to kind of fill in the blanks, which means that, of course, if you tell me false information, you can trick me into making a new memory very easily.
Right.
But if I have perfect recall, so long as it matches the facts I know, you do get weirder things that they just really, really are very confident of their memories because of course they are. And of course it's total bullshit, just like it is for everybody else.
That's so interesting. Oh my God. Well, I mean, I feel like we could talk about these topics until the cows come home.
No, I feel almost bad because I feel like this has been such a wandering conversation of just like
no, not at all.
This is random topic that has.
This is awesome. This is exactly what we've been looking for. The biggest challenge that I see in the world today is that people lose their curiosity. That society trains it out of you. It teaches you that you need to grow up. You need to become an expert in something specific. That becomes your identity. And you're not willing to approach new things and have this childlike wonder about the world where you're still constantly learning and still constantly being excited about new things. One of the reasons that I, was so excited coming across your channel and people like you, on YouTube who continue to explore the world and to share it with people is that is what, makes us great as human beings. And the more that we can promote that kind of thinking and that kind of wonder about the world in the greater population, I think the more interesting the world will become. How do you stay motivated, curious? What is your sort of media diet like? Are you reading books? Are you reading newspaper articles? Like what gets you up in the morning and what gets you excited about the world and keeps you, constantly exploring new things?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Oh yeah. We're hitting with the heavy ones at the end here. Get ready.
Well, that's the same. That's how I kind of got into this whole trying to do it as a life doing YouTube was that when I was a kid, I wanted to be an engineer because I wanted to create things. And then I kind of getting into university, I realized how rare it was that you would be a project head. You'd usually, be just literally spend all day making a cog.
Right.
And also how much math and various things that I have a passing interest in, but didn't want to be spending my entire day working with. And so I moved from that and I said, maybe I'll get into physics because physics is just fun as an intellectual thing I did in high school. And when you get into sciences, inevitably it's, are you a researcher or a teacher? Because those are really the only paths.
Options. Yeah.
And I said, I think teaching will be fun because I get to share my love of physics or chemistry as the case was. And then also you have an audience of 30 kids an hour, whatever, that in between lessons, you also get to share some of this fun stuff and actually hopefully inspire a little bit of curiosity within them to be interested in the grander world beyond the basics that you're teaching them. Because let's face it, once again, up K through 12, you're not getting any information that you can't learn in like 10 minutes searching on Wikipedia.
Right.
But I do think the foundation is still important. And I think that curiosity is really important. And then at some point I was getting my certification and doing different master's paths towards education, and it kind of was working, kind of was just not working out for me very well. And I realized at some point, I'm like, wait, I'm spending all this time to like, get a degree, get 30 kids in the room, half of whom don't want to be there and at all. And all of that for maybe 5 minutes a day, a couple of little insights per year where I get someone actually interested in these bigger conversations.
Right.
Much more, it's not as secure of a career path, but it's definitely more the thing I wanted to be doing, to just be spreading this information.
Awesome.
And as for actually maintaining curiosity, I think that the big ones are actually a healthy dose of science fiction and fantasy reading.
Nice. Who are your favorites?
I think, you experience enough other worlds and it's like, oh yeah, that's something that it keeps the imagination active. And I think that is the big part.
Are you familiar with Isaac Arthur?
No.
YouTube channel. You got to check him out. He's this guy who basically advises science fiction authors on what's technically maybe possible. And he creates like 2-hour-long videos on really specific topics. Anything that's potentially possible in our future, he's covered it in a 2-hour YouTube video. And my mind has just been blown on, and this is what got me into like the thing about the Fermi paradox and like Matryoshka brains and what's it called when they're building all of the spheres around a planet, around a
Dyson
sun,
sphere.
A Dyson sphere, all of this kind of stuff. And he talks about it in the theoretical sense and just kind of like opens your mind to like all the craziness that could be happening in the universe, maybe even right now, but even in our future.
Science fiction, and there's a subgenre called speculative fiction, where it's science fiction, but all of the science is at least possible based on our current understanding. And
exactly, so he focuses on that.
Books. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the speculative fiction books, you get into a weird thing that you can be good at science or you can be a good writer, and it's not
so
that they're mutually exclusive. It's not that they're mutually exclusive, but to actually be good at both is a very narrow genre of people.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations? Do you have any favorites who walk that line well?
For speculative fiction, what's it called? Brain Age. And there's a couple of books that are fairly big in it. Obviously, Isaac Asimov is,
of course,
what everyone always, looks to. It's not speculative fiction, but kind of the genre of critical thinking. Are you familiar at all with Less Wrong?
No.
Less Wrong is a, forum or collection that was headed by Elisir Yudkowsky.
Love him.
He's
amazing.
And it's just, a kind of data dump of minds that are looking towards the future and whatever, and they basically will write papers arguing against each other on various different facets of the potential future and what's possible. And I have started on my channel doing a live read of Elisir Yudkowsky wrote Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, which is my absolute favorite series. It's not like I probably read it cover to cover once a year and in parts more often than that, because it's a weird thing that he took the world of Harry Potter and he said, now let's have Harry understand science and philosophy and then go into Hogwarts. And a lot of Harry Potter fans say, no, science doesn't work in Hogwarts. This is all ridiculous, whatever. And Yudkowsky kind of says it. And I also emphasize that science is just the way that we look at the world. Like your ability to observe the world and make predictions is the core of science. You cannot remove science without removing human intellect.
Yes.
And if in the Harry Potter world, you learn that waving a wand around in a certain counterclockwise direction while saying certain words produces an effect, learning what that words are, and more to the point, how those things work is science.
That's right. That's right. You can do that in any world. Yeah.
And Elisir Yudkowsky does such a great job that a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that Harry in this world is a rational person, which he's absolutely not. He is at the end of the day, he is written as an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Who happens to have read a great deal of books done by philosophers and physicists, and he knows the science on an intellectual level, and he knows what steps you should be taking to be a rational person.
Right.
But there's a big gap between knowing how it is to be rational and actually being a rational person.
Right.
And so people, I have friends I've tried to get into it, and they get super annoyed because they say that, you know, he's supposed to be a rational person, and then he does these irrational things and it breaks suspension of disbelief. And it's like, no, you're missing the point.
I mean, he's
not
still a
rational.
child.
Don't worry about that. The only thing that matters is follow the same breadcrumbs that he's given and try to think for yourself of what these things are. And he does the best. Once again, I can't recommend it strongly enough to people, but it's not a small read. For being a fan fiction, it's 122 chapters long.
Jesus Christ.
And like I did a word count comparison at one point, and it's like the equivalent of reading through the first 4 Harry Potter books.
Wow.
So like, it's a little bit of a work of passion even to read through it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But like at the very end, he does the coolest thing, and I don't want to spoil anything in case you guys do read it or anyone watching goes into it. But Harry gets into a predicament with Voldemort at the very end. I feel like that's safe to say. Everyone who's familiar with Harry Potter
knows
like,
that's
whatever.
coming. Yeah.
That's not too spoilery. But he gets into a predicament with Voldemort. And Voldemort in this is also, because he's someone that could take over Wizarding Britain. He's not an idiot, whatever. He also is a fairly smart leader. And Lysier takes away all of Harry's tools and leaves him in this absolute, like, you're ready to see him just get destroyed, whatever thing. And in movies, they always, you set them up with an unbeatable scenario, and then they kind of wedge in the answer, and the writers obviously knew the answer that they wanted to give before they even thought of the problem, or often they make an answer that when you think about it, like, wait, why did that work? That
like
work.
how did that actually, yeah.
And Lysier Yudkowsky did, like, it's such a dick move as a writer who's writing a serialized fiction that he's writing it one chapter at a time. He says, okay, here's the situation. You guys have 60 hours to provide me with an answer. Otherwise, we're going to have a shorter, sadder end to this than I have laid out.
Wow. That is amazing.
And so he says, yeah, here are the tools. Let me make it very clear. Harry can't learn any new spells that he hasn't. Anything that's not canon is not going to be canon. You can't pull something out of your butt. You need to use there are tools that you have available to you as a rationalist. He can't escape this, I'm sure. There is no unbeatable problem. Everyone watching, you have so much time. If you have midterms or something coming up, real life has to come first. Don't spend all your energy, and let me encourage people. Take your time, think through the problem. Don't just blurt out the first answer you think of without thinking it through. Think of it as a real problem. Here's the cutoff of when I accept answers. Go for it.
Wow.
That's really fucking cool.
So people were able to submit answers and basically discuss the problem that was in front of them.
Yeah, people did it. And everything that comes past that point in the story, he had basically 2 paths. He had Harry wins path and Harry loses path already basically written up, minus a couple of details of the answer that people gave. Mm-hmm. And he went for it.
That's really cool.
It's so cool. But like, it's also such a dick move as an author to just be okay, I've thought up a terrible situation that seems to have no answer. Make an answer or your favorite character dies.
I think it's great. It gets people involved. It's like interactive fiction. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other one. Part of as a YouTube creator, it's almost cheating reading the work. Yeah. Because in addition to just obviously getting content by reading each chapter, and I emailed him about being like, he has a disclaimer on his site that says it'd be really poor form as someone who's writing a fan fiction to turn around and say that you can't use any of my stuff.
Right.
But I did email him about it just to be like, hey, so on the one hand you said this, but on the other hand, I feel kind of bad just taking it wholesale from you and doing it. Within a day, he emailed me back and just said, yeah, go for it.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
That's awesome. It's so cool how technology is enabling us to connect with other creators like that and almost like riff off of people in a way that, artists have been doing for generations, but it, technology really enables you to get right in people's inboxes and like almost in their heads almost instantly. It's so cool.
Yeah. Change my light.
All right. We ran through our sunlight. This has been such an awesome conversation. We're nearing the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, I think we're like, we started a little later, but yeah, getting close there.
Pretty cool.
The other thing with methods of rationality, and this is why the other half that it's almost cheating as a content creator, particularly in the earlier chapters, he name drops actual studies like a couple of times per chapter. All the science in the series is real science.
Wow.
Oh, that's really cool.
And he name drops a bunch of studies constantly about this thing or that. And so I get to go in and he talks about it as it applies to the story. Like he'll say, oh yeah, Harry remembered that there was this kind of study saying that humans behave a certain way in certain contexts and whatever. But it's still just, he goes very surface. It's just enough to continue the story along while saying that there's real science. And for critical readers like you or I, who are not just reading it for the fiction, but actually enjoying the
science,
learning kind of from it, which is weird to say from a work of fiction. He gives you the tools that you need in order to delve deeper. And so I get the chance to actually, I'll read a chapter and every 3 or 4 chapters go back and do a summary of, hey, so here's all of the science that was mentioned in these chapters in a little bit more detail. Let's talk about the studies and shortcomings. And so that's fun for me too, because it's just not an infinite well of content, but it is definitely a well of interesting subjects that I'm able to pass on in greater detail.
That is so cool. Where are you publishing these episodes? I haven't seen them on your channel.
I haven't gone very far in. Right now, I've only published the first 3 chapters.
Okay. But they're on your channel, Get Smart with Rory.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
I have such a thing, like I don't want them to dominate the channel because I feel like as a viewer, it's very, you're either there for the story as it continues or you're not. And and particularly as I get deeper in, once I'm like to chapter 30 or something, people who haven't been following it from the beginning, and I only get like maybe 50 or 60 people watching my videos at any given time. So 30 chapters in, I hope to be much more popular. And I'm a little bit fearful of I'm up to, let's be incredibly optimistic and say 1,000 subscribers.
Right.
And they're looking at weekly, I release a chapter or something, and they're like, this is cool, but I have to go back and watch 30 videos to...
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
You kind of get lost.
And there's 122 of them.
Right.
But then again, Elias Yudkowsky has his own fan base. And I think that, people are always happy to read audiobooks and stuff. And so there is some people are going to get a lot are really going to enjoy these videos.
Right.
And so I'm kind of walking this narrow path of how many hours of methods of rationality do I want to release per month or whatever? Do I aim for 1 chapter a week? Do I start recording up a bunch as I kind of have, and I just release them anytime I'm too tired to do a full video of my own?
Right.
How do I pace this so that I'm continuing to do interesting content on a variety of subjects for casual viewer, but also getting through this behemoth of a work in a reasonable time frame that I'm not dropping 1 chapter a month for the rest of my life?
Right.
No, I mean, that's the challenge of running a YouTube channel. It's so fun to hear your behind the scenes process.
I almost consider putting that onto a separate channel, except that I think that it is, I don't know.
Bring people along for the ride. The beautiful thing about YouTube is that the algorithm is very good at promoting different videos to different people. So it's not just your subscriber base, but it's also the greater, YouTube audience in general. If you're using the right keywords and YouTube discovers, hey, there's this person over here who's actually been watching videos related to this, they're going to see that video and maybe not see the other ones. And so I think that's my favorite thing about YouTube, and podcasting doesn't necessarily give you the same opportunity to do this, is that you can kind of be all over the place and the right people will find your content if you make enough of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, very early on, you mentioned, I think, people who I look up to in the sphere or whatever. And I'm a big fan of CGP Grey and Tom Scott, a couple of big YouTubers who basically do the same thing that I'm trying to do, but have 10 years of experience doing it and have hired a staff to help.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Which is, on one hand, it's nice to see that I'm in a niche that people are interested in. On the other hand, it's obviously a little bit intimidating to be like, yeah, these are the guys that I'm
So this is what's so amazing to me though is to see people like you and us. We're in the same ballpark. It's who look at the other people that are doing it well and have had success with it, and not just see, wow, that's amazing. They've really put in the work and they're just really talented, but rather to look at it and be like, huh, I could do that.
Yeah.
And then not just to say I could do that, but to then actually go and do it fail and realize, okay, I really suck at this. But then to say, maybe if I make this part a little bit better, maybe if I get this, my lighting a little bit better, maybe I get a little bit better audio, maybe if I like focus the topics like this, and just to constantly iterate and to not look at it and be like, oh, wow, I'm not at their level, so I should just stop. Because that's such an easy thing to do, is to say, I'm never going to get to the point that they're at. But if you actually go back and look at their earliest videos. Oh, yeah. Casey Neistat's my favorite example of this. He's the one who made me feel like anything could be possible, because when you look at, are you familiar with Casey Neistat? He's a famous YouTuber. He lives in New York. He made a vlog every day for like 5 years and basically got 10 million followers as a result of it. But he's a filmmaker. He would constantly talk to people. People would always be asking, how can I, what camera do I need? How do I do this? What's important? He would always say, none of that matters.
Yeah.
Go back and look at my first videos. He moved to New York September of 2001, right when the towers went down. And his first videos were him walking around with a handheld VHS or whatever the fuck those DVR old tape, actual fucking
camcorder.
No
You learn
digital.
as you go.
And just recording shit, and he'd record himself, and his shit sucked. His shit fucking sucked, and he'll tell you that. Look at my early stuff. Don't look at where I'm at right now with the highest end technology and 15 years of doing this and struggling at it and learning from it, and then say that, oh, if I'm not that good, I'm not going to do it. So the people that are able to look at that and to say, I'm willing to go through the iterative process of trying and failing and sucking and putting it out there and just slowly getting better with the belief that if you do it for long enough, it's going to work and it's worth doing. That to me is so inspiring. And that's why I've been so inspired to see you and to see what you're doing. And, you're kind of at a similar stage as us. And
you said like, what keeps me going. And I have a couple of science sites that I scan occasionally, and I've keyed Google well enough to be recommended pages on whatever big discoveries come out. But for the most part, it really is kind of, exactly what you say, that I don't have that huge platform that I'm successful right now, but I get a steady 20 people or so that are watching videos. Yeah. And I'm sure you know from your own experience that even your smallest videos, not every view is from a subscriber. There's always people that are that you don't know who are touching your videos. And if you can get just a couple of people who are interested in it, like I often wish that I was doing a podcast, because I live for the kind of interaction of, bouncing things back and forth like we've been doing and talking about stuff. And just for whatever reason, I'm, in my lane. But it's all about forging those connections and getting people interested. And I think it's so cool anytime I find someone. Even you mentioned, I think that you saw my conversation when we were talking about the phosphine potential life on Venus. My only commenter for a very long time on that video, and that's one of my more successful videos, but I had a long discussion with a weird alien conspiracy theorist who was saying that,
I saw those comments.
Was there life on Venus, but it was like advanced alien technology, which they migrated to Earth after they destroyed their habitat and also destroyed another planet that was
based on what evidence exactly?
Yeah, exactly. But it's so fun, even with guys like that you're like, well, I believe that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And you just get into this conversation. And I thought the funniest thing with that whole thread, because I'm small enough that I have the time and willingness that I can engage anybody in whatever crackpot theory that they want to be forcing. The only comments I'll delete is the obvious bots that are trying to sell something that, whatever.
Right.
But I'm having a conversation with him. And the second I got to the point where, I've been playing along and I've been kind of like, well, give me the information, I'll look into it. And if there's information that the government is doing a big cover up and I find anything that convinces me as a skeptic, I'll do a video on it, because damn, if there's evidence of advanced alien life, like
shit,
sign me up. And the second, so I dig into it because I promise I do, and I have a little bit of time on my hands. And I very quickly get to a sketchy site, like put together with very minimal knowledge of like how to build a website.
Like a GeoCities website and
doing
shit.
channeling aliens from various planets that are supposedly light years away. And they wanted something like $40 per 15-minute interview that you could do with him.
Wow. So it's like a psychic almost.
And I replied to this guy. I'm like, well, I found this. I reached out on their contact form to see if, we could work something out, whatever. But I think, I don't see this pursuing. I'm not willing to put a bunch of money into this paywall for something that I'm this skeptical about. I feel like if there was this technology, it'd be the people would want to get their information out more readily.
Yeah.
Right.
And I even said, like, when I was reaching out to the people, I said, I'm a skeptic, but I understand research takes funding. And if you convince me as a skeptic, I'll put in as much money as you want to proceed with the research, because I'm sure that if you're actually somehow doing faster than light communication with an alien in Alpha Centauri, that your research your budget, like you must be really scraping by to do this. I can't imagine the costs associated. And this is the kind of thing that I would love to support. So like, I'll put in money after you convince me.
Sure.
Right.
Oh man. And then they were like, we don't really do that anymore. And they kind of gave me a very not answer. They're like, well, we can't do it, basically.
Right.
And I brought this back to the comment section. I said, so this looks like it's going to be a dead end. Sorry. Thanks for whatever. And I don't know if you know this on YouTube. I just discovered it. If the parent of a comment thread deletes their comment, the entire thread goes away.
Oh, Lord. That's so unfortunate. And
so I found that out because as soon as I was like, I'm not going to pursue this paywall and whatever, this is a conspiracy theory made to make money off of conspiracy theorists. Whatever.
Right.
As soon as I went into there, immediately went silent and deleted the comment. And there's no record of any of this anymore.
Oh, no. Just wasting your time.
I almost wish that I had, except that it would be in bad faith, mean-spirited. I kind of wish that I had like screen captured this conversation so that I could go back and like do a conspiracy theorist video.
Right. That'd be great.
Later and be like, so this is the kind of stuff that YouTube is inundated with.
Oh my God. Right. That's a whole nother conversation. That challenge, that these black holes, you call them, where you can just get sucked down these fake information tunnels
it's the algorithm to YouTube is a black box that's always going to be a black box, because we were talking about computers taking over stuff. The YouTube algorithm isn't done by humans at all.
It's already here.
Not anymore. Like humans put in some beginning input, but the amount of video that goes up on YouTube and is watched by people daily, there's no way that humans can
regulate all of it.
I mean, they can do some kind of algorithm. And at some point in the early days, it was a completely human written algorithm that they said like, oh yeah, if someone's watched this, look for things with the same keywords and try to do this and that. But to be as refined as YouTube is, where, you think about something that you want to buy later this week and they immediately have a video for it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
You mentioned to your friend your wish list, and YouTube and Google and Facebook all know immediately what you're.
Yeah. Advertising at the end of the day is running the show. But the problem is these algorithms, they're designed to essentially figure out what's going to get the most watch time, what's going to get people to spend the most time on the app. And that means promoting stuff that frankly is just not healthy for society. And these conspiracy theories end up being, they end up having a huge platform because they're engaging and they draw people's attention and they get people excited and they make people feel like they have some inside knowledge that the rest of the world doesn't know. And it makes people feel a little bit better about their lives.
And on each step with the conspiracy theories, like whether or not, it's the same thing with any belief that lacks evidence. But at every step, like with YouTube, I click on a video which is a little bit outside of my regular wheelbase. It's just something, I'm like, oh, this looks sciencey. This looks interesting. I'm going to click on it. And then it gives me recommended videos. And at every stage, there's a fork that is going to give me some recommended videos that are more based in reality and some that are less based in reality. And every time I click on another video, it's just going to continue offering that same fork over and over again until I've seen big content creators play with it. Get a fresh YouTube account, go on to
that's so interesting,
incognito or whatever. And they say, okay, so how long from a completely fresh account, how long does it take me to get into absolute shoe on head crazy conspiracy.
That's
And
genius.
it's like,
We have to do this. We
it's
have
like
to do
7
this.
videos.
7 videos?
I mean, that's the one I saw.
I'm not surprised.
He just clicked on it and he got to something about like within like 2 or 3 videos, of course, he had the same like aliens built pyramids, whatever. Like that was very quickly within. And I mean, he was actively clicking the ones that seemed
on the crazier side.
He said something about like, I'm not going to go out of my way to click the one that absolutely is the most
extreme,
overt extreme, but videos that seem interesting to me as an actual person that I might click on, whatever, but I'm going to tend towards that end of the spectrum.
Right.
And I don't even remember what he got to, but it would like you get into conspiracy theories that make the bread and butter ones that you've heard about seem absolutely sane. Like you get into things like, you know, Doctor Who being an actual documentary series or something.
Right. Well, there's actually been, there's a whole section of YouTube that is algorithmically or computer generated content that gets uploaded just constantly. So they have like computer algorithms that are just creating this new content and uploading it. And it's just these weird, like, have you seen those videos where, I don't know, it's like a computer kind of generating what it thinks a cat looks like. And it's like iterating through all the different weird stuff. That's one version of it. Now imagine you take kids videos, right?
The kids videos are super weird.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
The creepiest thing I've ever seen. And it's like parents just leave their kids watching on autopilot where it just starts recommending one video after another. Next thing you know, they're watching their favorite characters like having weird kinky sex and cutting each other's heads off. And like, you know, oh my God, who is it? Duncan Trussell has a great podcast where they've turned into a Netflix show now called, is it Midnight Gospel? Where basically it's that same style of animation, which is just like so totally random. And because his podcasts are so totally random, if you listen to him, he's really big into like mushrooms and DMT and psychedelics. He
takes a lot of acid.
Everything that he talks about is basically, it sounds like somebody on an acid trip, and now they animate that. But now you have kids watching these videos that are created by computers and nobody even knows that it's happening. And they're all of a sudden they're seeing this really awful content that's really, nobody was involved in making it.
Saw that some other content and it's just trying to generate a variety of content. Right. Not trying to necessarily even have the most popular content because it doesn't need the most popular. It just needs something. And so it saw that any video, like this video had Spider-Man getting in a fight with Miss Piggy or whatever. Right. And that's already a weird video. And it just then does a random association like, the 7 steps towards Kevin Bacon on Wikipedia.
Right. Exactly.
It just grabs, it says, okay, so Spider-Man fighting Miss Piggy, let's try Venom fighting Kermit or, whatever. And it just starts doing these loose associations because they're all still within the realm that they get clicks. And one thing doesn't get clicks and it kills off that line of evolution.
Right.
But it literally is computer evolution of videos towards things that get anything that gets clicked. And since it is just carpet bombing the spectrum, because computers can do 100 of these videos in a blink of an eye because they are just using stock imagery. It gets weird. It's so weird. I've seen some of them.
It's so weird. And so this is what we're dealing with, in terms of algorithms. We're talking about computers, taking over down the road, but the ways that they're already influencing regular people's lives and then society at large as a result of that, as people get more caught up in conspiracies or whatever it is. And these are things we're wrestling with right now. And this is, this next decade is going to be such a struggle of us figuring out how to deal with this runaway technology that we can't evolve our society fast enough to keep up with the rate at which technology is changing. And that's a scary place to be.
That's I don't remember who generated the idea, but the idea that there's a technology gap, whatever, where like your mind gets blown from the new technology.
We talked about this with Seth Underwood about how you have to go back a certain amount of time in order for technology to be incomprehensible to somebody, that window of comprehension, I think it's called, is getting so small that it's happening in in a year's time or in months' time now almost.
Right. If I go to prison and am cut off from society for a year or something,
and you come back.
You see people who are serving 20-year sentences. And I think 20 years ago, I was 11 or something. That's, let's see, actually it's 2020. So that means that Windows Millennium was the computer of the time.
Yeah.
98, I'd say, was the first kind of decent Windows. I guess 95 was fine, but like anything beyond that and any kind of computer, basically, there's no such thing as a home computer.
There's no YouTube. the downloading an image on the internet, you could watch the image like load like this. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And
Wikipedia was still untrustworthy.
I mean, computers.
Yeah.
To someone from 20 years ago. And that's just like, not even video calls like what we're doing, but just like, I have a computer, I use it to store, my Microsoft spreadsheets and calculator. Like that is already like kind of the upper limit of what they're ready to deal with.
Right.
Not me having a cell phone, which that little cell phone, I'm able to get any information.
Do video calls and like watch YouTube videos and stuff like that. Yeah.
Play video games increasingly.
The complexity of our relationship with these devices is just growing exponentially every year, to the point where, telling somebody from the 90s that you would basically be spending, I don't know, some huge percentage of your day staring at a tiny screen that you carry around with you that's in your pocket and doing all of your communication on, that you're constantly in touch with whoever you want to be in touch, that you have the wealth of the human knowledge in your pocket, and all the things we can be doing, it would be magic to them, and that window of comprehension is getting shorter and shorter every year, and society isn't able to keep up. So we need a fundamental rethink in terms of how we're going to be dealing with this change in technology, because it's having huge effects on society and we don't know how to deal with it. It's crazy.
Well, and that's exactly I think that is the number one problem of the day, honestly, is
agreed.
How do we deal with increased technology? Because we're going to get to a point, we mentioned the YouTube algorithm and algorithmically created videos, and that's already a mess that most people are only barely aware exists, but it's going to become more and more prominent. And as computers get more advanced, it's also going to become more subtle. Like I can see an algorithmically created video right now, and as someone who knows it, I can spot them out right away, I think.
Right.
But of course, I say that because of course, the ones that I don't call out right away are just ones that are better. And so who knows?
It's like plastic surgery. Good plastic surgery, you don't even notice it, but you only think that plastic surgery is bad because you only notice the bad plastic surgery. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the same thing, the old thing, there's no such thing as a unsolvable mystery or something.
Huh.
And it's,
right.
Or there's no such thing as a perfect murder.
Right.
And
eventually
that's the exact kind of thinking that people will say who've only experienced imperfect murders.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that confirmation bias. And it's so hard to remind yourself that your bias is existing in a world where you're only noticing a subset of the greater whole, and you don't have the ability to see the other part of the whole, so you think that part of the whole doesn't exist.
But and you get into this weird conflicting dynamic of, on the one hand, I have no evidence of a perfectly created algorithmic video, and so I need to use my logic to say, do I believe that it exists? Whatever.
Right.
But have you heard, I don't know what the actual thought experiment's called, but the idea of like the invisible tea kettle in space?
Yes. Russell's teapot.
Yeah.
Isn't it called Russell's teapot? Bertrand Russell came up with this argument that essentially,
Russell, yeah.
that to prove, not to prove, but to show how silly the arguments for God are. He's like, if I asserted that there was a teapot between here and Mars floating in space, you'd have no way of disproving it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about conspiracy theories, and you get in this weird scope of, are we conspiracy theorists for talking about algorithmic videos that we can't discern as being algorithmic?
Right.
Because if it's a good video, we don't have the evidence of it and whatever. But as people who are technologically savvy, we acknowledge the potential of it.
Yes.
Right.
But we don't have the evidence of it. And as computers get more advanced, it's going to become that they're doing things that we can't have the evidence for, because any human trained way to call it out. It's like looking at, we talked about how the phosphine on Venus is now starting to be called into doubt. And I was looking at that actually earlier, and they were saying that how they treated the data to get the spectrographic lines, they're like, this may or may not actually be the data
as
that you
strong
thought
a
it
results.
was.
Yeah.
And the astronomers who originally did it were saying, well, if the lines were able to be seen by the naked human eye, we would have had this evidence ages ago. We have to do this computer manipulation of the data in order to extract anything useful out of it.
Yeah.
But then once again, black boxes, you're kind of counting on your system that you're running it through to be able to give you accurate information.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're going to run into a wall sometime in the near future where computers are telling us this is reality, and we have to take on faith that the computer is telling us the truth.
So our relationship with reality almost becomes more tenuous, more moldable, more interpretable. You know what I mean? Like people can actually be living in different realities. And we already experienced that somewhat with the political divide and people living in their bubbles. You know, people who live in a Fox News bubble and a right-wing bubble, they don't see the same world that we do. And it's not that they're not seeing a different world. It's all in the information sphere. But as our experience of the world becomes more and more informational,
given.
Right. You know, how do we deal with that? Do we just give up and live in the matrix? Like, I don't know.
Well, and that's, I feel so scattered that I keep jumping back to old conversations and kind of stream of consciousness, whatever. Once we get to a computer that's sufficiently smarter than us, in the same way that we make enclosures for monkeys and whatever, that they can't tell that it's not wilderness.
Right.
We get into a world where the computers take over everything. And we either prosper or we die off, because depending on how well we were able to make the computer's ideals match our own.
Right.
And there's so many failure worlds, like we tell it to optimize our happiness, and the computer says, well, okay, let's give everyone a permanent morphine drip and
right. Or plug us into the matrix.
Morphine coma and whatever.
I think the matrix is a very real fear, you know, that the computers eventually just have us hooked up to this virtual reality, and just it gives us whatever stimulus or whatever worlds that we want to have to keep us, you know, not knowing real reality.
And that's the interesting one so we have one of the winning scenarios. At some point we have to be willing, if we get computers that are smarter than us, and there's a question to be said whether or not we'll ever recognize it, because a sufficiently smart computer will be able to deceive us and sell us that it's not. And we're like,
that's exactly
we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
That's
We've been there for like 20 years.
Yeah.
But if computers get smarter than us, at some point we have to be willing to just say, you know what, computer, like, you have to know best. Otherwise you would have destroyed us if you wanted to.
Right.
And then just say like, okay, so we have the computer, and a winning scenario is that we're going to get into a weird thing that how do we define success for humanity?
Right.
And one of the more winning case scenarios is that humans are basically a favored pet of the computers, that they manipulate.
The zoo hypothesis.
We have our little ant farm, and they want the best for us, and they want our ant farm to feel like we're getting stuff done and feel motivated to keep going out and living our best lives. But at the end of the day, any major disaster, the computer's like, no, we're going to just gently steer away from those, and we're blissfully unaware.
Right.
I have one question on that last topic, though. So when we're talking about, you know, the different paths that could materialize as a result of artificial intelligence becoming smarter than human beings, and you were mentioning that one of those interesting pathways is that we kind of just become irrelevant, and then the machines become more intelligent, and they end up taking over and inheriting the earth from us. Is that a bad thing? You know, because when we think about, like, as individual human beings, we're never going to live on forever. We create offspring that we pass our knowledge and our morals onto in the hopes that they then inherit the earth and do something interesting with it. Could machines and technology be the eventual inheritor of humanity? Would that be a bad result?
So long as they maintain humanity, like as a pet, whatever, then I think that.
Why is that necessary? I mean, we don't think of our children maintaining us as pets. Like, eventually we die off. Like, let's say eventually humanity does die off, but the machines that we've created become our offspring. They are our eventual children. Is that a terrible scenario?
I think that I'm not equipped to say a good or bad scenario, because, like, at the end of the day, based on the physics we know right now, there's an eventual heat death of the universe, and that is the end. At some point, entropy wins and everything just falls apart. And that's neither good nor bad. I believe there's a very high likelihood, almost a certainty, that there are alien civilizations somewhere in the universe. Very likely not within our bubble of the universe, but depending on how large the universe is, the potential basically approaches 1. Is that a good or bad thing? It's a completely neutral thing. It's just a thing that is. Is computers taking over from humans? If we've reached a point where we have augmented ourselves to be the computers in a greater or lesser degree, then that's fine for humanity. That is humanity evolving to shed this very weak, fleshy, whatever. If computers are the offspring of humanity, but are not tied to humanity, they are their own evolutionary force, then I can't say if it's good or bad on the universal spectrum any more than the fact that aliens exist. They basically are just a alien life form, which has replaced humanity at that point. I think that is a loss for humanity, though, because we no longer exist to perceive it.
Do you think that most of the intelligent alien life, if it exists in the universe, is technological by the time it gets to the point that it can be multiplanetary?
I think that is one of the very real possible extinction gates towards interplanetary travel.
We've gone for 2.5 hours now. This has been the coolest conversation. We've run through all the batteries on my Panasonic camera. We're now on the Nikon camera. We've dropped down to 1080p at this point. Our technology is not keeping up, even though it feels like in some ways it's taking over our lives. In other ways, we still have a ways to go. Or maybe that's
a ways to go.
Maybe that's on me. Maybe I just need to get a couple more batteries so we can have these real 5-hour conversations and put Joe Rogan to shame.
Oh God.
No,
I'm
not going to do that.
Get better lighting before that happens.
This has been such a pleasure, Rory. It's been so inspiring getting to watch you, grow your channel and cover the same kind of topics that we're interested in. We look forward to watching your career grow on YouTube and hopefully having more of these really interesting conversations. Periodically we'll touch base on whatever's going on in the world, whatever is inspiring us and keeping us going. So I hope we get to do this again. Keep up the great work.
You too. I always love watching all the guests you guys bring in, and seems you guys tend to be a little bit more political than I am, I feel like, but it's always very entertaining.
Yeah, we bounce around the spectrum quite a bit. We have trouble focusing, I guess you could say.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's what happens when you have 2 hosts with ADHD.
That's right. Just so that people can find you, where do people find you online?
Well, I am on YouTube at Get Smart with Rory, and also have a Twitter. I think it's also Get Smart with Rory, same handle. But everything, of course, is linked together. If you can find one, you'll find them all.
Perfect.
Awesome.
It's been great speaking with you.
We're going to put all the links in the description, as well as links from any of the things that we've been talking about in the show today. So if you are interested and you're still hanging on at this point, make sure to check that out. You can find us at funtimeprogram.com. And we are also Funtime Program on all the social media channels. So if you're still hanging around, check us out. Leave us a comment. Throw us a like on the video. Go check out Rory, Get Smart with Rory. His videos are awesome. And we will see you guys here in the next one. Thanks for hanging with us.
Thanks for checking out this clip from our show.
To watch more clips or full episodes, click on our profile below.
If you want to stay up to date on all of our new episodes and videos, click subscribe.
And if you have any ideas for future guests or topics that you would like to see us cover on the show,
leave us a message in the comments or connect with us on any of our social media channels at Funtime Program
or on our website at funtimeprogram.com.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.